Hello everybody, it's Peter with an I, S-T-A-W-A-R-T, and welcome to segment 26 of,
I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess?
Pottymouth wasn't going to go on a long, weepy monologue about getting over a crush, or shoot a bunch of sunshine up his muffler, but when Frank looked back at his face, Frank could see in his eyes that he was human, and he could truly side with being human. With his heart torn and his soul flooding with emotion, he threw his arms around Pottymouth and held him tight. All the frustration and sadness had eaten away at him so badly, so very badly, worse than he had known. Ordinarily, Pottymouth would have pushed him away, but he knew Frank needed a hug, and so did he. They both had been torn apart inside, and they both needed healing. So Pottymouth let Frank hug him. Actually, he had no choice. Frank was strong. In fact, with his muscular strength, coupled with his emotional outpouring, Frank's hold on him was crushing. Frank didn't mean to, but he cried. He couldn't control it, and all the tears and sobbing gushed forth. He could hear that Pottymouth was crying too. Everyone cries differently. Some tender people, who weep on a daily basis, sound quite natural. Strong diehards, who have spent a lifetime battling life with a Viking spirit, have an awful time trying to cry. It's awkward, like a desert valley flooding with water for the first time in a billion years. When Frank heard Pottymouth grunting and gasping, like Rocky when his trainer got punched out by Mr. T, he knew that just such a riverbed had flooded, and Frank cried some more, rejoicing and rejuvenating in the waters of life. After a while, Frank felt better. He still hurt from not being united with the cup of his dreams, and he knew it would be a long and hard road to walk before he was over her. But he knew there was hope. At last, he slowly pulled away from Pottymouth. "Thanks," he started to say before Pottymouth fell to the sand and didn't move. "Hey," said Frank, nudging him with his foot. He still didn't move. Frank went down and felt his throat, and yes, his throat was still there. It's a sure sign that somebody is in serious trouble if their throat is missing. That's why in movies, paramedics sometimes check their throat with the 2 fingers, to make sure it's still there. Frank shook him. "Hey," he repeated. Frank punched him in the chest and counted 1, 2, 3. But he didn't do that again because it didn't look like he was doing much good. Frank got up and looked around. There were houses across the inlet, and probably every one of them had a telescope. But Frank knew that most people wouldn't be looking out their telescopes or binoculars at that time of the morning. He knew he'd better not stick around too long, just in case somebody passed by their plate glass windows and saw somebody standing over a body, i.e. him. When Frank imagined the conclusions people would jump to if they saw him punching the other guy in the chest and the other guy laying dead on the beach, he decided to run. He started to run up the trail, but stopped to turn around to fill up the tent, but then decided to forget the tent, and he ran up the pathway as quick as he could. It was pretty steep, so he walked. Finally, Frank sat down to rest. "I'm really thirsty," he said to himself. From above, he saw how the tide was rising and would bury the evidence in short order. Chapter 24. Frank had hoped the sea would be his broom, and the shore would act as his dustpan, and his little mistake would be cleaned up spick and span. But it didn't really work that way. Neptune had a cruel sense of humor. Instead of floating out to sea, to sink in a dark cavity deep in the ocean floor, like a lost and forgotten ping pong ball that had rolled under the refrigerator, Potty Mouth's body was rolled on the prongs of Neptune's fork, down the length of the Horn, and toward the beach where the residential houses lined the shore. Hours into the afternoon, when Frank returned to the edge of the cliff to make sure that Potty Mouth had gone sayonara, his muted gasp sounded like the squeal of a pig when he saw the body of evidence had traveled so far. The red coat it was wearing made it easy to spot as it traveled a little farther with each wave that broke on the sand. Frank raced down the trail as fast as he could. Little pebbles that were thrown free jumped each time they bounced against the vertical aggregate face. Frank wished he could just jump down to the shore, but he'd have a terrible time disposing of Potty Mouth with 2 broken legs. He imagined the panic and agony he would suffer as he crawled away to one of the nearby houses and called for help. I was building a sandcastle and I broke both my legs. Can you please call an ambulance? The residents would surely wonder how a person could break both their legs making a sandcastle, and decide it must be one heck of a castle, something you could use to fight off the Welsh. They would inspect a lump of sand and find the dead body, and wonder if building such a castle was really that important. And instead of the police, they would call OSHA. As Frank ran along the blade of the Horn, he tried to estimate how much time he had before people started coming home from work. He didn't have much time at all. The hour hand had sunk pretty deep into the afternoon. As Frank's running feet sunk in the soft sand, and his lungs ached with an icy electric sensation, he could see that Potty Mouth's body had made its way down to the beginning of the residential beach. It was like his body was dancing as it got hit with waves. Dressed in the red coat, he seemed to roll back and forth, showing off for all the houses. He might as well have stood up with a cane and sang Yankee Doodle Dandy. He finally caught up to Potty Mouth, who looked a lot different than he did that morning. He had gained quite a lot of weight, and the sand did quite a number on his complexion. It was like somebody with obsessive-compulsive disorder went crazy with the loofah. Frank dragged him through the waves, which were nothing but an irritant. Frank wondered what he would do if somebody strolled out onto their deck and saw him. All he could do in that situation would be to give a little wave, nod, and say, "Howdy do." Even after he'd recovered the body and dragged it back along the Horn, he still wasn't sure if he was in the clear. Somebody may have spotted him and called the police, and he would have gone through all that trouble for nothing. In fact, the sheriff was probably sitting at the top of the cliff with a shoot of grass cradled in his teeth, waiting for him to make it all the way to the top of the trail and say, with a drawl and a click, "Son, you're under arrest." Frank might not know if he was bound for prison until a day or two later, or even a week later if the officer was either on vacation or simply too backlogged with paperwork to go out there and make the arrest right away. To take his mind off it, he went out for some ice cream. When he went to pay, he realized he didn't have much money. It was the cherry on a perfect day. He killed somebody. He was tired and his back hurt. He was wet with salt water. He stunk like the grave. And he didn't even have enough money to pay for his ice cream. The fact that he didn't have all that much money in his pocket, or anywhere else for that matter, hit home the fact that he couldn't afford a place to stay. He really didn't have time to plan and save up for a move.